Most people search for happiness in comfort, in safety, in the approval of others. But Friedrich Nietzsche warned us. That very search is what keeps us weak. The dark trick to real power is not in avoiding suffering, but in embracing it, transforming pain, chaos, and struggle into strength. Nietzsche believed that only those who dare to face the abyss gain the freedom to rise above the herd. In this video, we'll uncover the unsettling secret he left us, the hidden path where darkness itself becomes your greatest source of power. Nietzsche's idea that suffering can be turned into strength begins from his rejection of the common view that pain is something to be avoided at all costs. For most people, suffering feels like an enemy, a cruel interruption in life's pursuit of comfort and happiness. But Nietzsche saw it differently. He believed that every wound, every loss, every struggle carries within it a hidden potential. Suffering is not just an obstacle to be endured, it is raw material that can be shaped into something greater. Without struggle, without resistance, there is no growth. To want strength without pain, to want depth without tragedy, is to want the impossible. Nietzsche's message is that the most powerful individuals are not those who lived easy lives, but those who learned to take the blows of existence and transform them into energy, insight, and resilience. This perspective begins with a radical shift in attitude. Instead of asking, "Why me?" When confronted with hardship, Nietzsche urges us to ask, "What can I make from this?" He compared life to the work of an artist, and suffering is the rough stone from which the sculptor carves. Just as marble must be struck, cut, and broken in order to reveal its inner form, human beings must be tested and broken open by suffering in order to discover their own inner strength. Pain is the hammer of life, and the question is whether we will let it shatter us or shape us. For Nietzsche, greatness is born out of this confrontation. Those who hide from pain remain shallow, while those who embrace it deepen. Nietzsche's own life was a living example of this principle. He suffered from constant illness, isolation, and personal loss. Yet he turned these experiences into the soil from which his philosophy grew. His books were not written from the comfort of success, but from the depths of loneliness and struggle. He transformed his suffering into words that still burn with intensity over a century later. That transformation is what he wanted others to learn. Instead of trying to eliminate pain, one should learn to metabolize it, the way the body turns food into energy. Suffering, if approached correctly, becomes nourishment for the spirit. It is easy to think of suffering as purely destructive, but Nietzsche challenges us to see the other side, its creative power. When life is too comfortable, people tend to stagnate. They drift, repeat routines, and rarely confront their deeper potential. Struggle, by contrast, awakens forces within us that we did not know existed. A crisis strips away illusions, forcing us to see who we truly are. A loss tears open the heart, but in that very wound lies the chance for greater depth of feeling. Even failure, humiliating and painful, can become the foundation for wisdom and self-mastery. Nietzsche insisted that every act of becoming stronger requires the fire of suffering to forge it. The warrior spirit, the philosopher's insight, the artist's genius, none of these are born in ease. They are sharpened in struggle. At the core of this keynote is a psychological truth. The more one runs from pain, the more powerless one becomes. Modern culture often encourages avoidance, quick fixes, and distractions from discomfort. But Nietzsche points out that this avoidance makes us fragile. By facing pain head-on, by refusing to treat it as an enemy, one gains a strange kind of power. Enduring what others flee from, accepting what others cannot bear, gives an individual a strength that feels almost unearthly. It is not that suffering itself is good, but that the ability to transform it is the secret source of greatness. Nietzsche's dark trick is not to love suffering for its own sake, but to love the strength it can unlock within us. Nietzsche's idea of rejecting comfortable lies begins with his suspicion that much of what people believe about life is not the truth, but a set of illusions carefully built to protect them from discomfort. Human beings crave certainty and security, so they invent systems of meaning, religion, morality, social customs, that soften the harshness of reality. These illusions provide comfort, but they come at a cost. They weaken us by keeping us from confronting life directly. Nietzsche believed that true strength is found only in those who are willing to tear away these comforting veils and stand face to face with reality, no matter how unsettling or painful it may be. To reject the lies that soothe us is to accept the challenge of existence in its raw form, and that acceptance opens a door to power. For Nietzsche, The most dangerous illusions are those that teach people to avoid responsibility for their own lives. Religions that promise an afterlife, moral codes that demand obedience to external authority, or social expectations that prescribe how one should live. All of these, in his view, distract us from the harder task of creating meaning for ourselves. When someone believes that their suffering has a predetermined purpose, or that their goodness will be rewarded in some heavenly realm, they can endure life without truly facing it. Nietzsche argued that such beliefs, while comforting, trap the human spirit. They prevent us from experiencing the raw intensity of life and from cultivating the strength that comes with independence. Rejecting these illusions is frightening because it removes the safety net, but that very fear is what makes the rejection powerful. The dark trick, as Nietzsche saw it, is that most people are too afraid to question the lies they live by, but those who dare to reject them immediately rise above the crowd. To recognize that life may have no predetermined meaning, that morality is not given from above but invented by human beings, and that comfort is often an enemy to growth, this recognition sets one apart. It strips life of false securities but also grants an individual the freedom to create their own values. It is terrifying to stand in that freedom because it feels like standing over an abyss. Yet it is only there, without illusions, that true power begins. The herd clings to illusions because they are easy. The strong individual rejects them because they hunger for authenticity. Nietzsche did not deny that illusions can make life easier. He knew they could bind people together and provide a sense of belonging. But he believed that ease and belonging are not the highest goals of life. Greatness, creativity, and genuine strength emerge only when one dares to cut away the lies. It is like tearing away the scaffolding of a building to see if it can stand on its own. If one's sense of meaning collapses without illusions, it shows that it was weak and dependent all along. But if one rejects the lies and still continues to live, to act, and to create, then one's power is proven. In this sense, rejecting comfortable lies is not merely intellectual, it is existential. It is a test of whether you can carry the weight of life without external crutches. The courage to reject illusions does not mean living in despair or nihilism. Nietzsche warned against falling into that trap. Instead, it means accepting the harshness of life as it is and still choosing to affirm it. When illusions fall away, what remains is reality in its raw, unfiltered form. To embrace that reality without flinching is a rare strength. Most people would rather cling to easy stories that protect them from the void, but Nietzsche challenges us to stand in the void and create our own story. This is the dark trick that gives one power. The refusal to be comforted by lies, the willingness to face life without masks, and the courage to bear the weight of that honesty while others hide from it. Nietzsche's vision of power in self-creation begins with his rejection of the idea that meaning or identity can be handed down from outside. He saw that most people live according to values inherited from religion, tradition, or society, rarely questioning whether those values truly belong to them. To him, this was a form of slavery, because it kept the individual trapped in roles and expectations designed by others. The alternative, though far more difficult, is to create oneself, to become the artist of one's own life. This act of self-creation is not about inventing fantasies, but about shaping one's character, desires, and destiny with the same intentionality that a sculptor uses to form stone. For Nietzsche, the highest human beings are not those who conform, but those who have the courage to build themselves from the ground up. Self-creation requires first a process of destruction. Nietzsche believed that to make room for one's own values, one must shatter the false idols that dominate ordinary life. These idols might be moral codes that teach obedience, cultural norms that demand conformity, or even inner voices of fear and doubt that hold us back. He described this as a kind of spiritual clearing, where the old structures are torn down so that something new can emerge. This stage is frightening because it leaves a person without the familiar supports of tradition or approval. Yet it is only by breaking away from these external authorities that one gains the freedom to decide what one truly values. The individual who dares to destroy what no longer serves them becomes the ground on which a new self can be built. But self-creation is more than simply rejecting what is given. It is the active project of forming a new identity. Nietzsche often spoke of life as a work of art, and the self as the canvas. Just as a painter chooses colors and shapes, a self-creating individual chooses the habits, goals, and principles that will define their existence. This is not a one-time choice, but a continuous act of shaping and reshaping, since life is always changing and demanding new responses. In this way, self-creation requires both discipline and imagination. It is not enough to drift along. One must constantly decide who one wishes to become. That ongoing act of decision is itself an expression of power. A central part of Nietzsche's idea is that meaning cannot be discovered like a hidden treasure waiting to be found. Instead, meaning must be made. When people rely on external sources to tell them what life is about, they give up their creative power. But when they accept that meaning is something to be invented, they take back responsibility for their own existence. This is both liberating and terrifying because it eliminates excuses. No higher authority can be blamed for a wasted life or a cowardly choice. The self-creating individual lives with the full weight of freedom, knowing that every choice is part of the sculpture they are carving. Nietzsche admired those rare figures in history who embodied this spirit of self-creation. He saw in artists, philosophers, and leaders examples of people who dared to step outside of inherited norms and shape new paths. But he did not think this possibility was limited to the famous or powerful. For him, anyone who rejects passivity and takes up the responsibility of self-shaping becomes a creator. Even in small acts of defiance against the herd, one exercises the will to power that defines authentic life. The process may be difficult and isolating, but it carries with it a sense of vitality that cannot be found in conformity. The essence of Nietzsche's teaching here is that the self is not something we are given once and for all, but something we must build. To refuse this task is to remain incomplete, trapped in the values of others. To embrace it is to discover a deeper kind of freedom, a freedom that comes not from being told who you are, but from deciding it for yourself and having the courage to live it. Nietzsche's idea of embracing the abyss is one of his most unsettling yet powerful teachings. By the abyss, he meant the experience of staring into the chaos, meaninglessness, and despair that lie at the heart of existence. Most people avoid this confrontation. They distract themselves with routines, entertainments, or comforting beliefs that shield them from the terrifying thought that life may not have any ultimate purpose. Nietzsche insisted that this avoidance makes us weak. The abyss is not something to flee from, but something to face directly. To stare into it without flinching, to endure the vertigo of realizing that there may be no absolute foundation beneath our lives, is to access a form of strength that few ever achieve. It is in the confrontation with the abyss that an individual learns what they are truly made of. The abyss appears whenever illusions are stripped away. When the promises of religion lose their grip, when cultural values are revealed as human inventions, or when personal hopes collapse, a person stands face to face with nothingness. For Nietzsche, this confrontation is inevitable for anyone who seeks truth rather than comfort. The danger, of course, is despair. Many, when confronted with the abyss, fall into nihilism, the belief that nothing matters and that life is meaningless. Nietzsche saw nihilism as a sickness of modernity, a stage humanity must pass through once the old structures of meaning collapse. But he did not think it should be the final stage. Instead, he believed that the abyss is a trial. If one can endure it without being destroyed, one can use it as the ground for a new kind of strength. What gives the abyss its power is that it strips life down to its most basic condition. When there is no guarantee of meaning, no promise of eternal justice, no certainty of reward, the individual is forced to take full responsibility for existence. This is terrifying because it eliminates excuses and safety nets, but it is also liberating. Those who embrace the abyss realize that if life has no built-in meaning, then they themselves must create it. This realization transforms despair into possibility. Instead of being paralyzed by nothingness, one learns to treat it as a blank canvas. The abyss, once embraced, becomes the space in which the individual's will to power can assert itself. Nietzsche compared this confrontation to standing on the edge of a cliff and gazing into infinite darkness. It is dangerous because it can overwhelm, but it is also exhilarating because it reveals the vastness of possibility. To embrace the abyss is to recognize that life is fragile, chaotic, and uncertain, and to choose to live fully anyway. This choice requires courage of a rare kind, the courage to affirm existence without guarantees. Most people cannot bear this, which is why they cling to illusions. But those who can endure the abyss discover an inner freedom. They are no longer bound by the need for external validation or comforting myths. Their strength comes from within, forged in the silence of the void. This teaching is not abstract philosophy alone. It has profound psychological meaning. When someone loses everything they relied on, a relationship, a belief system, a sense of purpose, they often feel as though they are falling into emptiness. Nietzsche's challenge is to not run from that fall, but to face it and transform it. The one who survives the abyss learns resilience that cannot be broken by external circumstances, because they have already confronted the worst, the possibility that life itself is without inherent meaning. From that confrontation emerges a deeper capacity to create, to affirm, and to live with intensity. The abyss does not vanish, but it ceases to terrify. It becomes a constant reminder of freedom, and in embracing it, one rises above the fear that keeps most people chained. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is one of his most misunderstood yet central insights into human nature. Many interpret it as a hunger for dominance or control over others, but Nietzsche meant something much deeper. He saw in every living being a fundamental drive that goes beyond mere survival or reproduction. To live, in his view, is not simply to maintain existence, but to expand, to overcome, to assert form upon chaos. This restless drive, this force that pushes life to grow, innovate, and transform, he called the will to power. It is not a moral principle, but a description of the raw energy of life itself, and those who recognize it within themselves can learn to harness it as a source of immense strength. At its core, the will to power is about overcoming limits. Plants stretch toward the sun, animals carve out territory, humans strive to create art, build societies, or seek knowledge. In each of these, Nietzsche saw the same impulse, the desire not merely to persist, but to assert, to expand, to become more. Survival alone cannot explain why people take risks, endure suffering, or push themselves to extremes. There is something deeper at work, a longing to test boundaries and shape reality according to one's vision. Nietzsche's insight was that this drive is universal, though it expresses itself differently in each person. For some, it manifests in creative genius, for others in intellectual pursuit, for others still in acts of courage or leadership. Nietzsche believed that much of human misery comes from misunderstanding or repressing this will to power. Societies, religions, and moral systems often teach people to deny their deeper impulses, to be content with obedience, modesty, or passivity. While these values may bring social harmony, they also suffocate the individual's vitality. When the will to power is suppressed, it does not disappear. It festers and turns inward, leading to resentment, self-hatred, or destructive behavior. Nietzsche saw this in the moral systems that condemn ambition or strength as sinful, while praising weakness and humility as virtues. For him, this inversion of values was a way the weak sought to control the strong by disguising their envy as morality. To reclaim one's will to power is to shed these imposed values and to embrace the drive to expand and grow without shame. This does not mean embracing cruelty or tyranny. Nietzsche was not advocating for a life of oppressing others. The purest expression of the will to power, he believed, is not domination but self-mastery. The strongest individuals are not those who control others, but those who control themselves, who channel their inner drive into creation rather than destruction. A great artist or thinker expresses the will to power not by ruling people, but by shaping reality through vision and expression. In this sense, the will to power is the essence of creativity, innovation, and self-overcoming. It is the fire that drives a person to rise above mediocrity and become something more than what they were. What makes the will to power such a dark trick, in Nietzsche's terms, is that most people never recognize it in themselves. They believe their lives are directed by external forces, by duty, by morality, by the expectations of society. But beneath those appearances, it is the will to power driving them all along. To admit this truth is unsettling because it strips away illusions of passive innocence. Yet to embrace it is to unlock a new kind of freedom. By acknowledging the will to power as the fundamental drive within, a person can begin to shape it consciously, directing it toward growth, mastery, and the creation of new values. This act of affirmation transforms the hidden force of life into a deliberate source of strength, making the individual not just a passive participant in existence, but an active creator of it. Nietzsche's idea of freedom through courage rests on the belief that most people live in chains, not because they are physically restrained, but because they are bound by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of suffering, fear of standing apart from the crowd keeps them obedient to rules and illusions that offer comfort. For Nietzsche, this obedience is a subtle form of slavery. It prevents the individual from living authentically and from discovering the strength that comes with independence. True freedom, he argued, does not come from the absence of rules or external control, but from the courage to face life without illusions and to stand firm even when it means isolation. Courage is the price of freedom, and without it, people remain trapped in the safety of the herd. At the heart of this idea lies Nietzsche's critique of conformity. Human beings, by nature, are drawn to belonging. They find comfort in adopting the beliefs, customs, and values of the majority. This conformity reduces fear because it shields the individual from standing out, but it also strips life of its intensity. Nietzsche believed that those who follow the herd never discover their own power because they are always guided by external approval. True freedom begins when a person dares to break from the herd, to think independently, and to create their own path even when others disapprove. Such defiance demands immense courage because to stand alone is to risk misunderstanding, ridicule, or even hostility. Yet it is only in that solitude that an individual encounters the depth of their own strength. Nietzsche often emphasized that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to confront fear without retreating. Fear will always be present when one challenges accepted norms or steps into the unknown. But courage transforms fear into fuel, a force that sharpens rather than paralyzes. He saw this in the figures he admired, philosophers, artists, visionaries, who dared to voice truths others avoided. Their freedom did not come cheaply. It demanded a willingness to suffer, to endure loneliness, and to carry burdens that most would reject. But it was precisely this endurance that made their freedom genuine. Without courage, freedom is an illusion, because the individual remains bound by invisible chains of fear and dependency. Courage also plays a role in Nietzsche's broader theme of self-overcoming. To grow, one must face challenges, failures, and inner conflicts that test the limits of endurance. Cowardice seeks escape from these trials, but courage embraces them as opportunities for transformation. The individual who has the courage to face suffering discovers that it can be turned into strength. The one who has the courage to reject comforting lies gains clarity, and the one who has the courage to embrace the abyss learns to create meaning in a world without guarantees. Each act of courage tears away another chain, bringing the individual closer to genuine freedom. It is not a freedom that promises ease or security, but one that opens the possibility of living fully and authentically. The dark trick hidden in Nietzsche's vision is that freedom is terrifying. It removes the safety nets that protect most people from the raw truth of existence. To live courageously means to give up the illusions of certainty, to accept responsibility for one's life without excuses, and to face the possibility of failure without retreat. Most avoid this path because it is too heavy to bear, but those who embrace it find a kind of sovereignty that cannot be taken away. Their freedom is not granted by society or guaranteed by tradition. It is won through the courage to stand alone, to affirm life without guarantees, and to carve out meaning where none is given. This is the freedom Nietzsche saw as the highest form of power, born not from comfort or obedience, but from the fearless heart that dares to live without illusions. Nietzsche's message is not an easy one. He doesn't hand us comfort. He doesn't promise safety. He dares us to confront the darkness within life and within ourselves. Suffering, illusions, the abyss, the restless will to power, all of these are not enemies to be feared, but forces to be harnessed. The dark trick, the secret path he points toward, is that power does not come from running away from life's harshness, but from embracing it fully, without masks, without excuses. Real freedom is born in courage, and real strength is forged in the fire of struggle. Nietzsche's challenge is simple but demanding. Dare to face the truth. Dare to create yourself. Dare to live without illusions. If you can carry that weight, then the very darkness that frightens others will become the source of your power.